Hey everyone, and welcome to one of my philosophical lecture shorts. This time taking place a little different area. I'm actually out here at my family's river house, hiding out as we are on I guess we're in indefinite break from going to school in person as we do a remote instruction during the coronavirus outbreak. And I thought, hey, I'll come out here where it's pretty, stay away, practice social distancing. I hope you're all safe out there. But that's why, so when I do some of these new lecture videos, they're going to be from my cabin. And this lecture video is going to be for my logic class that we are right dead in the middle of the semester. We are discussing Hurley's Concise Introduction to Logic, of the 11th edition. And we had just finished up chapter 4, and we were getting ready to start chapter 5 with categorical syllogisms. Now, it's really important that if you're in my class right now that you taking a look at chapter 4. I know we finished it before we left for spring break, but knowing the contents of chapter 4 is going to be important because it's going to build on what we talked about. Categorical propositions are going to build on now for categorical syllogisms. And as I talk, you'll see me reference some of the things from that chapter, so make sure you are up to date with everything. All right, in this section, we are going to talk about categorical syllogisms from Hurley's book from chapter 5.1, which deals with standard form and mood and figure of a categorical syllogisms. Now in this segment, this video is going to be 2 segments. This segment, we're just going to talk about standard form. So let's do standard form. All right, so first, I think before that, let's define what a syllogism is in general. So a syllogism is any deductive argument that consists of 2 premises and 1 conclusion. Example number 1 is actually a syllogism right there. And we've actually in our class already dealt with many syllogisms, not all categorical, but we have done that so far. Now let's talk about the anatomy of a syllogism. So we see some key terms over here. We have the major term, minor term, and middle term. So let's talk about what they are. Now, in order to find out what a major and minor term are of any argument, the place you always, or any syllogism, you always have to look is at the conclusion. The conclusion is going to tell you everything. So we look at the conclusion here, and we see there are 2 parts of this that we need to pay attention to. That is the subject of the conclusion, which is right there. We'll put an S, and the predicate of the conclusion. We'll put a bad-looking P right there, okay? So that's the subject and predicate. You'll see these categorical syllogisms up here are also made of subjects and predicate as well, here, 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 and here, right? So to figure out the major term of a syllogism is always the predicate of the conclusion. There it is. So the major term of this one would be musicians, all right? The minor term is always the subject of the conclusion, which would be philosophers. And now we see them repeated here, philosophers here. There is the minor term. And then we see here, where is it? Musicians right there. That is the major term. Now the middle term, which is what we need to talk about, that is the term that appears in the argument twice but doesn't show up in the conclusion. So it would show up twice in the premises. In that case, we have here, what is it? Creative people right there. And here we go, creative people right there. So we see this argument. If we go right through it, major term is musicians, minor term is philosophers, and middle term is creative people. And if we read the whole argument, it's kind of fun. All musicians are creative people, all philosophers are creative people, and no philosophers are musicians. I don't know if that's true or not. I like to consider myself a philosopher and also a musician, but maybe I'm not good at either of them. I don't know. Guess do you have to be good to be a philosopher and good to be a musician? All right. We have also the major premise and minor premise here as a term, which are really easy. It's just the major premise is the premise that has the major term in it. The minor premise is the premise with the minor term. We see here musicians was the major term, so the first premise is the major term, or major premise, excuse me. We see philosophers was the minor term, so the second premise is the minor premise. Just as easy as that. Okay. Now, in order to put a categorical syllogism into standard form, there's a couple things you need to remember. First of all 3 statements have to be standard form categorical propositions. And what I mean by that is they all have to be, if we learn in chapter 4, an A, E, I, or O proposition. So an all, a no, a some are, or some are not. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, make sure you go back to chapter 4 and take a look at it. So each proposition has to be at least one of those. And every occurrence of the term has to be identical, and you can't change meaning of it. So when I say philosophers here, I have to mean the same thing as philosophers here. I can't have a separate meaning. If I meant like good philosophers versus bad philosophers or something like that, it has to always mean the same thing. And finally, the major term, okay, the major premise always has to be the first premise, and the minor premise always has to be the second one, and then the conclusion. That is the order we will always go in. We'll see that's really going to help us when we go to classifying arguments here in just a bit. Okay, now that we know all that, let's take a look at the second example here. It says, all constantly worried individuals are people. Some constantly worried individuals are neurotic humans. Therefore, some people are neurotic humans. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is to see what's wrong with this. We need to put this argument, the syllogism, into standard form. Okay. So, how will we do that? All right. Well, if we look at it, we go to the conclusion. So let's see. Now, let's find out what the major term is. The major term is always the predicate, which is right there, which would be neurotic humans. And then people is the subject, so that's the minor term. Now, if we remember, okay, the major term for a standard form syllogism has to be the first premise. But if we look up here, so neurotic humans actually appears in the second premise, and the minor term, which is supposed to be the second premise, right, actually appears in the first premise. So in order to make the standard form, what do we have to do? Yeah, I know you all know what we have to do, right? We have to change those. Okay, now if you're working in the Hurley textbook, in the back they'll have some exercises that get you used to putting these premises in standard form, getting used to working with the conclusions and all that. Now, to finish up here in this segment, let's define what a categorical syllogism is. We've been using them the whole time, but I haven't gave that exact definition. And a categorical syllogism, all right, is any syllogism in which all three statements are categorical propositions, okay, that can be put into standard form. All right? And that is what we're going to work on in this chapter, is taking standard form categorical syllogisms, which are made up of categorical propositions, and we're going to classify them, and we're going to learn a lot about them. And one of the big advantages of putting this in the standard form, these syllogisms, is that it's going to allow us, just by looking at them, and literally just taking a look at them, we'll be able to tell if they're valid or not. And we're going to get so good at this, we don't even care what's being said in these things. We don't even have to, we almost don't even need all these words. Actually, you won't. You'll just need to know what we call the mood and figure, which we're going to learn about in the next segment, and then you're good to go. You'll know if it's valid or not. So we'll talk about mood and figure next, and if you have any questions, please let me know.